Welcome back. You're now watching the lifestyle segment of the weekend show. The topic of discussion is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Today we'll be assessing the implementation of it in Nigeria. As we all know, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals are a global blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. The SDGs set in 2015 by the United Nations General Assembly are intended to be achieved by 2030 by all nations. The goals are an urgent call for action by all countries in a global partnership. Nations have come to terms with the reality that ending poverty and other deprivations must go hand in hand with strategies that improve health, education, reduce inequality, and spur economic growth, while tackling climate change and preserving our environment. Joining us to discuss this topic, we have
with us in the studio Tabi Joda, who is an entrepreneur, an agro-forester, and an environmentalist. She's also the coordinator for 1 billion trees in Africa. Welcome to the show, Tabi.
Thank you for having me.
It's also my pleasure to introduce a friend, Rose Keffas. She is the special assistant to the senior special assistant to the president on SDGs. Welcome to the weekend show.
Thank you for having me.
Tabi, let me start with you. 1 billion trees in Africa. How do you intend to achieve that? And we all know that it ties into the climate change SDG. It ties into, global partnerships, because we know that you're also doing work with other UN agencies. So tell us how you intend to achieve this.
Thank you very much. We live in dark days, and dark days demands brighter light. That means the colossal nature of environmental degradation and the impact of climate change, so visible across the entire continent of Africa, calls for a very ambitious plan that is beyond just the commitments that have been put in place in the past years and decades, of course. And right now we're in a new decade of action, actually really meant for action, like your preamble said. It calls for urgent action to deliver on objectives to reduce poverty, to reduce inequalities, and of course reduce all the vulnerabilities upon which poverty, violence, and degradations of our landscapes and environmental systems lies. So 1 billion trees is just one of those action plans set on the continent by a whole coalition of young Africans, women, men, indigenous people who are passionate and ready to bring a new dimension in delivering on the goals, like the Sustainable Development Goals, and realizing the Paris Agreement, the Sendai framework, and of course the new urban agendas, and of course land degradation neutrality objectives, which are part of the way to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. But practically, as you would like to know, these goals or these objectives for 1 billion trees, women are ready all across the continent right now with their hoes, with their tools, tilling the soil with the hope that Africa should bring back its green glories. We know that Africa has been the green beauty of the world, but we've lost the green beauty over the years due to excessive resource exploitation or overexploitation or irresponsible environmental practices. So 1 billion trees is practically engaging every young person, every woman, every farmer, every communicator, every actor or stakeholders across Africa to hold back to what Africa has most in common in the entire competition of resources in the world. Africa is dependent on ecosystems. And that is the foundation upon which every African society lies. So 1 billion trees is bringing that action, waking up people from the slumber, waking every woman from their houses out on the street, say, let's regreen Africa. And the best way of regreening Africa is to plant trees, trees that bring back our food, trees that restore back our ecosystem services like fresh water, and of course, sustainable landscapes. And of course, if you know, trees are like the best pharmacy, the best supermarket an African has. So we are trying to bring back this conscientization, this knowledge, these actions that regreen Africa by planting trees starting from the southern part of Africa to the Horn of Africa to the Sahel, and of course restoring even the most basic, sensitive and most vulnerable ecosystems in Africa, like the Congo Basin that is so highly depleted, or now like the Lake Chad that is so seriously depleted. We want to restore all these landscapes.
Thank
And
you.
that's the intention of 1 billion trees.
Okay, I want to bring Rose in. So in Nigeria, globally, climate change is an issue which everybody's talking about, and it's extremely important. The Nigerian government has tried to play its part. We've heard about the Ogoni cleanup, which is reported to have started. Well, we also have in the northern part of Nigeria a lot of desertification. So with the way the Nigerian government is run, you have ministries giving different functions. So education is the focus of the Ministry of Education, healthcare for Ministry of Health. But your office pretty much oversees all of these activities and functions. How is the Office of the SSA to the SDG working in collaboration with all the ministries to ensure that their functions are in line with achieving the SDGs?
Okay, thank you. So that's one of our mandates, to lead the leadership of the SDG implementation. So we have 2 levels where we work with MDAs to mainstream the SDG into the sectorial plans. Like you said, like I'll add comment to what Tabi said. For environment, you know, they have the sectorial plan to achieve SDG 13. So if you also heard, the minister has approved planting of 25 million trees in Nigeria, following Mr. President's commitment at the UN Climate Summit. So what we do with the MDAs, we have interministerial meetings quarterly for them to report. But one of the best things we've done as an office was a simulation tool called the ISDG model, where we help MDAs plan, budget to implement the SDGs, to ensure that the SDGs are implemented at mainstream and the sectorial level.
So I was there in New York when the ISDGs was launched at the 74th United Nations General Assembly, and the general consensus from some people in the room was that, is this going to be just another talk shop? Is this going to be just another, you know, we agree here in New York, but as soon as we get back to Nigeria, it's going to be a completely different thing? So can you tell me, how has this worked so far? Are the MDAs, the ministries, departments, and agencies compliant with the ISDG model, and is it effective so far?
Well, yes, I think so, because it took us almost 2 years to train the MDAs. And we're looking at taking it to the subnational, because to achieve the SDGs, we need to go local, where we're going to help state statistics office, budget office, planning and research. We're going to train them. So it's helpful because with the new budget change now, so we've trained the MDAs, it's been adopted by the Ministry of Budget and National Planning. And you know, if you look at it, the Vision 2020, the ARGP ends this year. So this is what we plan in the next decade of Nigeria, the next development plan. So Nigeria has accepted to have the next 10 years, a development plan for the next 10 years. And one of the main focus is mainstreaming the ISDG into sectorial plans. So it's been effective, and I'm happy that it's going to play out. So it's not just talk, this is action now.
Tabi, but back to talk versus action. We're planting trees. We want to plant trees. I see countries like Norway, Finland, they've planted millions of trees, India, China. In Nigeria, however, we still do a lot of gas flaring. So we're talking about planting trees, but carbon emissions will still be extremely high. We still need to produce our crude oil, which is pretty much feeding us as a nation. How do we plant? How can we have a balance between ruining the environment and also preserving the environment? Isn't it counterproductive what we're doing at the moment?
I agree with you that it's, you can say it's counterproductive in the end if we don't do what is right, because we seem to have a new debate shifting towards land-based solutions to climate, but forgetting that the large amounts of carbon come from fossil fuels. And we are seeing a situation where many global actors like demystifying the impact of carbon from fossil fuels. So we don't want the restoration of lands or the planting of trees to seem like it is the game over for fighting fossil fuels. So I think we need to put these things, quote unquote, in two different spaces because they all come from two different. We are using nature-based solutions to restore lands and restore climate, reduce climate crisis. But we need to first and foremost also strongly defend land degradation coming from fossil fuels. So I think it's an entirely different debate, but all geared towards one thing because our targets are to reduce emissions, global emissions. How do we reduce these global emissions when we are still flaring gas, like you said? So I will say this is where the policy aspect comes in very strongly. We can't have a government that is pledging to plant trees, but at the same time not making pledges on how to reduce the gas flaring which are degrading the lands, like the Ogoni lands, like you cited earlier, and of course the Niger Delta regions of Nigeria. We need to put this very clear. This should be different aspects. And the attention is being shifted from fossil fuel, making it sound very minimal, which I think the media now has a very strong role in making this.
Which is why we're having such conversations.
The media has a stronger role in making this very clear to people that planting trees does not stop the need to reduce carbon emissions from fossil fuels. So we call upon the government, we call upon the policy segment to look very strongly that no matter how much trees we plant, it will never reduce the degradations or the impacts caused by carbon or fossil fuels.
That brings me to my point, Tabi. Despite the concerted effort of people like yourself who are fighting for climate action and climate preserving our environment, you know, it seems to go 13, I hope I'm right, seems to be one of the lowest ranking, you know, goals amongst the 17 sustainable development goals, in the sense that it has been the least effective. Out of the 169 indicators, we have not been able to achieve as much as we would like to in terms of climate change. So Rose, can you tell me those indicators Nigeria has been able to reach and those goals that we are doing the best at in this sub-region and the goals that we're faring the worst at, and what we could do, government, civil society, media, to improve on our actions before 2030?
Yeah, well, if you say it's the least, but you know, if you look at the new Minister of Environment, starting with the 25 billion, 25 million tree planting, the Ministry of Environment, they've been working. Another thing we have done as an office is, because we have the private sector advisory group, because the carbon emission comes fully, you know, adding to the carbon footprint is from the private sector. So one of the things our office has done through the private sector advisory is to help business run sustainable business. And that's where the GRI reporting comes in, when say, look, your private sector, you know, the SDG is all about partnership, and if the business, there's something called the SDG investment mapping, where there's profit in running a sustainable business. So it's beyond, you know, just polluting the air. So through the private sector advisory group, it's one of the things we've done to talk to the organized private sector to run sustainable business, less carbon footprint, go greenless. We have few companies who are very passionate about these things, and so then for us, Nigeria, in terms of the SDGs, one of the things I will share here is the government is actually working on the SDGs, because we have set the institutional framework, and now from this new decade, we're going to see we will feel the impact. We will see how the government has implemented it, how. So we have set the institutional framework. One of the reasons why Nigeria is rated very low, we don't have a national statistical data on the SDGs. So for the first time, before the next quarter, hopefully, we're going to publish the national statistical data on SDGs on Nigeria. Not people who just send surveys and use it to rank Nigeria. But of course, we didn't have one that could benchmark to say, look, this is how far we've gone, this is where we're lacking, this is the SDGs we're going to achieve. So for now, I cannot say much on which one we're doing. I think, data speaks better than me just assuming. But one of the focus of this government is, like President Muhammad Buhari said, is lifting 100 people out of poverty in the next 10 years.
100 million people.
100 million, sorry, yeah. 100 million people out of poverty in the next 10 years, which is going to be the main focus. If we lift people out of poverty, we're addressing, of course, climate change has affected people, has displaced people. So our focus now on the development issue is how to lift people out of poverty. And I wouldn't say that SDG 13 is the least in Africa, of course. But when people are dying of hunger, when people are displaced, it's just that there's more focus. But there's a lot going around the environmental sustainability aspect of the SDGs, like the Lake Chad Basin, the support, the the support of the Lake Chad Basin in the Sahel. There are a lot of projects going on, but it's just about maybe, like Tabi said, more media attention, because a huge amount of funds have been put in place,
Which poses a problem, Rose, because a huge amount of money has been invested in achieving these SDGs, but as you've just said, we don't have measures to track them. We actually don't have data to see how well you've been faring. So from 2015 till date, we have no idea these monies that have been invested in achieving these SDGs, going about these projects, are the impact that it's making. So I'm glad that the Office of the Senior Special Assistant to the President on the SDGs has created a module that would track this data and collate more information. But it is problematic to everyday Nigerians when we hear this, that for the past 5 years, we have no idea how to go about accounting for the funds and the projects that have been implemented.
Just to add to that, because I was about to chip in while you were talking, and in line with what Osasu has said, yes, we are aware of the Anchor Borrower Scheme, we are aware of the creative industry loans, we are aware of the efforts by the Bank of Industry, and so, yes, effort is being made to lift people out of poverty. And as a Nigerian, when I talk about SDG, I think about hunger, I think about poverty, which is what everybody thinks about. But the question is the sustainability part of it. Once we get some funds, you give us relief, you give short loans to traders, to the poorest of the poor, ranging from 10,000 to 25 and 50. How sustainable is it giving people funds to get them out of poverty, as opposed to creating enabling environments for them and providing the infrastructure and social amenities they need? So the question is it even sustainable with the programs which we already have? How can we continue that for another 5-10 years? Do you think it's sustainable?
Do I think it's sustainable? Well, from my own, I would just speak from the point of the SDG where, of course, now this is the reason why the government used the first 5 years or 4 years plus to set up institutional framework to make it sustainable in the long run. Because if you look at the ISDG model, even the simulation tool advised us on there are some SDGs that need no resources, so this is the way where we can save resources, and this is where we need to add more resources to it. So for us, we've set the institutional framework, and this is why we're excited about the next decade, because it's also, thank God, the 2020 agenda is ending, the ARGP is ending now. So this is where the SDG model, the SDG will be embedded at sectoral levels and also with state development plans to make it more sustainable. Yeah, there's short intervention, but as government, this is why the ISDG model has been, the simulator tool has been used to project for us in the next 10 years. So from now, what I can say, I'm optimistic that most of the intervention and projects that will be done to achieve the SDGs will be highly sustainable. So that's why that SDG model is very important, and Nigeria is the first to do that.
Tabi, let me give you the final word on here. What are your hopes and aspirations for us as a people and Nigeria as a nation in achieving these goals? Do you believe that all 17 goals would be achieved by 2030? And if so, what are some immediate actions that must be put in place, not just by government, because it's a collaborative effort, you know, but civil society, media, and the millions of people who are watching?
Yeah, I'm very optimistic. And I think there's an air of optimism out there as well. But we also need to be very realistic about one thing. Optimism should not be built on sand. It should not be built on blind optimism. It should be optimism that is backed by action. And there is a lot of commitment out there. But like, I want to emphasize this. Action is what is most needed. And because there is a lot of talk and very little doing, that might bring some gloomy days that could hold the success of the implementation, or efficient, effective implementation of the SDGs. But that calls for really serious action and honest delivering of what these goals are meant to be achieved. Because I always say one thing, in the execution of my job, education is not the only thing that makes a society successful. It is character. So we need to reframe the character of an ordinary Nigerian, the character of a policymaker in Nigeria, to understand that these communities where we come from, and it's in spite of the fact that you are now living in the high grounds of Asokoro or Maitama or wherever, you come from a community that calls for your own participation, to call for your own contribution. So that's where honesty needs to come in. Character needs to be part of what we make our individuals or all stakeholders involved to really think that, to see that as a basic way of achieving this. If we do this, we can successfully implement SDGs. Otherwise, it requires also that we should be able to appreciate excellence. We should be able to spot out those who are doing the right thing out there and celebrate them, rather than just celebrating people because we meet them on the street and then they tell us that they do this. You know, even if the media has to bring into limelight people doing things, we shouldn't celebrate too much of, I'll call social media action, right? So many people are planting trees on social media. So many people are, well, you know, growing crops on social media. But these crops are yielding no fruits to anyone.
It's only yielding fruits on social media.
Yes, so we need to reframe our own character of appreciating what our society is.
Most definitely.
So like an example of what we've done in the Lake Chad Basin. This is a Chad Basin that feeds 40 million people. And of course, the receding of this large basin of water that hosts a lot of ecosystem services is depleting. The depletion should not be an unconcern or a call for indifference from ordinary people, from women, from politicians, and from media people like you. So what we are doing to restore the Chad Basin is of great significance. The 1,800,000 trees that we are planting around this basin should have appreciation, should be looked as an example of what we all can do. If someone else is doing that in the Benue, someone else is doing same in the Niger, someone else is doing same far across in the Cameroon, someone else is doing that in the Niger Republic area, we will be able to reduce, as I said, the vulnerabilities upon which this human degradation lies.
I definitely
concur
with you, Tabi.
The optimism should look at.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the work that you do. We appreciate you, and that's why we invited you to the program to highlight people like yourself who are championing these sustainable development goals. Rose, thank you so much for coming on the program to keep us abreast with what the Office of the Senior Special Assistant to the President on SDGs is doing. We would definitely love to lend you guys all the support that we can in terms of media representation and push. So do contact contact the Weekend Show at your free time, and we'll be happy to partner with you and become SDG compliant.
Thank you.
Awesome. So we'll take a short break now. When we return, more on the Weekend Show. Don't go anywhere.